So let's start this story from the beginning. I was in the middle of a transition between the first dealership that I worked for and moving into the second dealership. So I was originally working at Toyota as a flat rate technician, and things were good there, but I was looking for a bit of a pay increase and also just needed to change. And so I started working for Chrysler. And I thought, okay, I've learned all the import stuff. I'm going to go learn some domestic stuff now. And that's exactly what I did. Moved all my stuff over, started working there. It was great, nice people. I knew a couple of the guys that were in the shop, and it was going really well. So basically, after a year or so, I sort of ended up making a deal with the general manager for an hourly with bonus. So that was another thing too. I went from flat rate to hourly, but we decided that okay, we'll do hourly with bonus. So it was basically it was a tiered schedule of, if you could produce 40 hours in the week, we'll give you an extra $1, and then if you make 50 hours in the week, we'll put you up to an extra $2, and this is on top of my hourly wage. So they would add $2 to my hourly wage and then back pay it for however many hours I produced. And then they had, I think it was 60 or 70 hours in the week, and you get $3. That's where it was capped off, was a $3 mark. So that was all good. I was like, sweet, I definitely know I can do this. I worked flat rate, and I was crushing it there when I was working at Toyota. I mean, the guys and I in the busy season, we would be crushing out like 16-hour days and leaving at like 3 or 4 o'clock. So I was like, for sure, I can do this. It's going to be good. And so the first month goes by, and they're like, oh, you didn't make bonus. And I was like, oh, pretty sure that I worked, pretty sure I crushed out more than the required hours to make bonus. I was like, okay, well, maybe I didn't. Maybe something happened, whatever. So the second month goes by. They're like, you didn't make bonus by like 2 hours. I was like, I'm going to have to start recording my time because there's something weird going on. So next month goes by, I record my time, and they're like, no, you didn't hit bonus again. So I'm like, well, I wrote everything down. So there's obviously a discrepancy somewhere. So I go and talk to the general manager, and I say, look, there's obviously something happening here. Something's not adding up because I should be hitting bonus. And he's like, okay, I'll look into it for you. I'll talk to the service manager, and we'll figure out what's going on. So I was like, okay, perfect. And then the next month I ended up hitting bonus. I was like, okay, that makes sense. And then it was shortly after that, I ended up moving up to service. They had a service advisor leave, and they're like, would you be interested in doing that position? So I was like, yeah, sure. Like, I'm good with customers. I like writing. I like explaining things to customers, all that stuff. So I ended up starting up there, and we made a deal that they would pay me the same as what I was making in the shop, and which is unheard of. I'm sure nobody in my city would be making the same wage as I as a service advisor. So I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And basically, after some time went by, I quickly realized that the program that we were using to generate work orders, there was all these labor operations as a library. And none of the labor operations were filled out or completed. So there was maybe 10 or 20 labor operations, just basic stuff like general spark plugs, 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, and oil changes and a couple other things. So when you're creating a work order, you could punch in for spark and it would bring up the job description and a preset time. So normally in that system, you would have a whole library of shortcut letters that you could type in that would bring up a labor op and then gets printed off and given to the technician. So anybody working in the shop knows what I'm talking about. Well, I found out that the service manager was writing all of these job descriptions as X, which is a general line. So he would write in a description and then add in whatever time he sees fit. And I quickly figured out that that's exactly what was happening with the bonus system. Is I would do, when I was in the shop, I would fill out the work order, put my punch tickets on the back, hand it in to him, and let's say I did a oil change, brake service, tire rotate, and something else, and it took me 3 hours, then the job's supposed to pay 5.8 hours. Well, he would break down my 3 hours and plug it all into those lines and bill the customer 3 hours. So I'm missing out on 2.8 hours worth of time. That's where all the time was going. So I'm like, oh my God, this is what's happening. I come to realize later on that he was just picking and choosing who's getting bonus, and he would just make the numbers to whatever he sees fit. So, I was freaking out. I'm like, this is just complete bullshit. Obviously, went and told the general manager about it, and he's like, okay, we got to get this figured out. Had a meeting with the service manager, and they were like, is that something that you would like to help fix? Do you want to create this library of labor operations? And I'm like, well, that's a big undertaking. It's not something that can be easily done like overnight. And I think it's above my pay grade. I know there's probably somebody that you could hire to come in and do all that stuff. So needless to say, it was just uncalled for, and I was quite upset. And then it was shortly after that our parts manager ended up leaving. So now it's just myself and the service manager, and they're like, would you like to do parts? And I'm like, well, not really. And they're like, well, we'll put up an ad if you could just temporarily do parts. So I'm like, okay. So I jump in the seat, and I had about 3 days of training on parts. Ended up doing parts for a little bit, and I was like, okay, this is a little trickier than I thought. Don't have a lot of training on it. I understand vehicles and all that stuff, but now I got to learn the parts program. I've got to learn shipping and receiving, ordering parts, all that stuff. So this is just at the height, or not the height, but the beginning of the pandemic. And if you work in a shop, you know that that was right around the time that back orders really started to become a thing. People couldn't get parts, stuff isn't showing up. You got parts that have no estimated time of arrival, and it was just a complete nightmare. So I'm trying to deal with people. They're calling in all the time. Hey, are my parts in yet? I said, no, I'm going to call you. And they would just call back anyways. It was just a complete nightmare. I had a list of parts that were supposed to be coming in, stuff that wasn't showing up. It was just insane. So then, to top it off though, the service manager ends up having to leave work for personal reasons. And he leaves for about a month. So I'm up in service by myself. I got to deal with phone calls, customers, making work orders for the technicians, parts, feeding the technicians work, closing out work orders, dealing with customers, phone calls. It was insane. Body shops calling. They want quotes. There's like 30 parts in the quote. It was just crazy. So I almost ended up having a meltdown, and I told the general manager at the time, I said, look, I can't be doing this. This is insane. We need people here. And of course, it was tough to get somebody in that position. Even though they had an ad up, they ended up putting the wash bay kid in parts with me. And he also did a little bit of service, but not much of a help at all. It was just somebody else that I had to babysit, basically. And come to find out that there was people applying for the job. They just didn't want to pay these people, even though the one guy was like a 25-year parts manager at another Chrysler store. I'm like, come on, give me a break. So everything just slid sideways. It was a complete nightmare. Basically, almost had a meltdown, and I was like, I got to get out of here. So I didn't have a stepping stone to jump to. That was one of the things just keeping me behind. It's like I got to pay bills. You got to pay for things in life. So you can't just up and quit. You need somewhere to go to make money. And it wasn't long after that an opportunity presented itself. I was hanging out with a friend, and his father owned a business, and he's like, hey, we're looking for a mechanic. So I'm like, perfect. So we talked about the details, and well, the rest is history. So ended up leaving the dealership, didn't want anything to do with it, and it didn't matter how much money that dealership was making and how much they invested into the dealership. The team just didn't work, so it was terrible. But anyhow, I hope you like this story, and if you have any comments or other crazy stories like this one, throw them down in the comments below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Thanks.